Happy Halloween guys! Today I have for you this Dracula makeup tutorial. So let's start with some coloured hairspray. This is the quickest way to achieve that blackout look to your hair. It doesn't stain, it washes out really easily, and it's super cheap. You can get this for kids in the Halloween section of any superstore. This next step is completely optional. As you'll see from the photo, I have covered Jack's eyebrows and I've given him some new ones a little bit higher up on his forehead. However, you can just go with your natural eyebrows and enhance them, or you can cover them with some wax or Elmer's glue. I'm going to use some bald cap material because I find this just gives the most seamless finish, but it is completely optional. If you want a very easy version of this, just enhance your natural eyebrows. On the left side, I've already covered Jack's eyebrow with the bald cap material, and now I'm going to work on the right side. So I'm taking some Pros-Aide, which I got from the makeup Armoury, and using a cotton bud, I'm taking that over Jack's eyebrows and also around them as a border. This is going to be the area that the vinyl bald cap sticks to, and then we'll be able to blend away onto the skin, but we want to make sure the brow is fully covered. Leave that Pros-Aide to go completely transparent. Then taking your offcut from your bald cap, stretch this out with all of your fingers and then press that directly over the area that you've applied the glue. This is going to give a really nice seamless finish. Then make sure you've pressed that in with your fingers to make sure it's completely sealed to the skin. If you get any rippling, work on that very quickly. Just gently lift it up and reset it in place. Now this is totally and utterly easy to do on yourself. I will quickly show you a little clip from my Bride of Frankenstein tutorial. I've applied the glue to myself. I'm using my fingers to stretch this over my brow, and then I'm just using my fingers to press it in across the border before I let go with my fingers. It's very, very simple to do. Admittedly, if you've never done this before, it can be a little bit daunting, but I promise you it's very simple. Now we have that in place, we're ready to remove the flashing around the edges. This is easily done with some acetone on a cotton bud in a rolling technique. You want to roll away from the area that you are releasing. Pushing away creates a very flat edge to the skin. Think of it as a very minuscule hill. You want to create a gradient from the vinyl down towards the skin so that it becomes completely seamless, and you'll only achieve this by rolling it out towards the surface of the skin. As you can see, that leaves a seamless finish and you cannot feel the texture of the eyebrow hair. For this look, I'm mostly going to be using this slim primary palette from the makeup Armoury. I'm going to take the orange with a tiny bit of red in there, and I'm going to use this to counteract the darkness of the brows peering through the almost transparent vinyl material. If we didn't use this, we would have that darkness showing through the light base that we're going to be applying over the top. This is going to help just disguise it from underneath. It's one of those trust the process moments. I've applied it very opaquely on the brow hair, and then I'm using a small brush to soften the edges so that there's no harsh seams. Once you're done, you should have something that looks like this. We're then going to take some Vichy Dermablend. Any translucent powder will work. I just like this one for my special effects makeup. And using a cotton pad, I'm going to apply this quite thickly, a bit like baking. This is going to absorb any of the oils. It's going to set that cream in place and make sure that the product doesn't move, because we're going to be applying creams over this. If we didn't set it in place, we would just create a very muddy mess. So allow that to sit for a few minutes before dusting it off with a very light fan brush. This amused Jack because it very much tickled. I've created this slightly off-white greenish grey shade. So taking the white cream, I've added a tiny amount of black and a tiny amount of green to it to create this shade that I think works really well for a Dracula complexion. I'm using a flat top foundation brush to apply this. It's very soft, it's synthetic, so it works well with cream-based products. And over the brows, we're not going to use a swiping technique because we don't want to disturb the orange that we've already set in place. Instead, we're going to stipple that over until we're happy with the first layer. Then continue to work down the face, covering the ears. Make sure you take it down the neck, pretty much everywhere. The reason I've chosen to use a cream base is because I'm going to work over the top of this with a mix of eyeshadows and paints, and I feel like when you don't set the base, you can create a really nice gradient, almost shade into the skin. So we're not going to set any of this in place except for the eyebrow area. You'll see that the eyebrows are the only area that still need a little bit of additional coverage. So we're going in with a powder puff, or you can still use your cotton pad with some more of that powder. We're setting it in place, and then we're going in with a second layer, stippling that over to create more opacity. At this stage, if your brows look a little bit more intense in that greyish white shade, do not worry, because we are going to be working all over this area with some paints and eyeshadows, so don't worry too much if it's not entirely even. If this area is a little bit more opaque, that's perfectly fine. So once you've applied your second layer, go back in with a little bit more powder again, just to make sure that none of this area moves. And I must stress, please don't powder the rest of your face yet, because it is likely that you'll get some fall down on this light base and you won't be able to clean that up very easily if you set that in place. Next, I'm taking some black Superstar paint. I love this because it really is intense black. And on my brush from Kryolan, I'm creating a sharp V-shape sideburn area because I feel like this is quite sinister. It's these little elements that really do bring a character together. Once you've got the general shape, you can then move to a bigger brush and just fill in this area, painting it black. We have used the spray paint, but you might want to make sure you really get in this area so that none of the scalp is visible. We're going for a painted hairline because it is a character rather than something that looks realistic. Now to get the widow's peak at the front. Obviously this is quite difficult for me because Jack is in front of the camera and I'm working from the side, so I've created a couple of dots to try and find the centre of his forehead from my view. So don't worry about these dots, they are super easy to remove. That's the beauty of makeup and face paint. If you get it wrong, you can simply wipe away. It's very easy to work with. However, if you set all this cream in place with powder, that would be quite difficult. So that's why I'm explaining to you. It's really important not to set anything in place just yet. So here I'm using a cotton tip with a little bit of micellar water just to remove that paint. Then I'm going back in with that cream base that we used on the face to patch that back in. Then we have the perfect V at the front. I was going to create a heavy eyelid, which is what these lines are for here, but ignore those because I do end up removing them. These are the lines you do want to follow because here we are creating a new eyebrow. We're going very, very theatrical with this. We want something that's going to be very visible in low lighting. We want it to be sinister, so we're going for a high arch. And again, don't worry too much if they're not perfect. You can work into them. I'll show you that one of my brows is so far off at the beginning, and then when I manage to get in front of Jack, I'm able to just change it later on. So don't panic, it's not a problem. So to begin with, I'm creating a base for the brow, following the line that we've already drawn on with some eyeliner. You want to use eyeliner in case you make any mistakes first before you go in with your paint. Now we have the base, I can start thickening the front. Then I'm going to change to a smaller brush to create thick, hairy lines. Again, think theatrical, and also because this is a male character, I want the lines to be a bit thicker. For my female characters, when I've done this kind of look before, I've used a slightly smaller brush and created more thinner hair strokes. So they're still thick brows, still sinister looking, but they're slightly softer in their appearance. For this look, we want it to be a bit more masculine. So I'm going to use a mix of black hairs, then going in with some white ones to break up and create more texture, almost like grey hairs, and then back in with black, and it's just a case of building on them. So here you can see the left brow is actually a little bit too far out, but I won't be able to work on that until I'm in front of Jack, so ignore this for a little while. I will bring the eyebrow slightly more central, and to do that I'm just going to add in a few more black strokes. I will darken these brows a little bit more later on with some black eyeshadow, but for now I'm going to move on to the forehead. We want to work from the top down so that we don't need to lean on the face later on with our hands on work that we've already completed. So try your best to start working from the top down. I'm going to use this Certified eyeshadow palette which I pull out every Halloween, and I'm taking a mix of the black, the grey and the white eyeshadows here just to enhance the lines on the forehead. Because this is a look that you would wear out in low lighting, we want this to be very obviously theatrical. In this light, it will look pretty basic, but it will be very effective to the overall look. I've applied a black eyeshadow to create the actual shape of each of the furrow lines, and then I'm going in with a small amount of grey to start feathering that colour out. You don't really want to use a swiping motion because we have a cream base down, therefore it really would start to pull that colour up. Instead, use a tapping motion. We're going from black to grey to white, back to grey, back to black. So that's how we're going to create a bit of a rippled appearance. You can see I've done this with colour in my other tutorials, such as my Wicked Witch tutorial and my Disney inspired witch, which is more like a beggar woman. These are my kind of favourite looks to create for Halloween because that theatrical finish is really what Halloween is all about. So don't worry yourself about being too precise, just enjoy creating this look. This is a very easy one to achieve. Here I am in front of Jack, just bringing in that eyebrow to be a bit more central, so they're a little bit more even, as you can see. I'm now taking a small angle brush dipped into the grey shade from the eyeshadow palette, and I'm popping this around the circumference of Jack's forehead following the shape of the widow's peak. This is just going to create more shape because the colour that we've applied as a base all over is quite flat, so we want to bring a bit more shape back to the face. Similarly to the forehead, we're creating more furrow lines around the brows, again keeping this super theatrical, so don't be afraid to go quite big with it. Once you've applied the darker shade, you can then go in with a small brush with a little bit of that base colour on and start blending it out so it creates a bit of a shadow effect. Here I'm taking a small amount of the white eyeshadow and just popping it in the centre of these furrow lines. I'm popping some black eyeshadow onto Jack's eyelids as a base. We're going to go in at the very end with some black paint to really make this area super dark, but for now we're applying some black eyeshadow. It will look slightly patchy to begin with, but again once we're going with the black paint it will be completely opaque on the top lid. Here I'm just patching in those lines that I drew for the heavy lid, which I decided against, and again I'm just using the base makeup here in a stipple motion over the top to erase those lines. Then I'm taking what's left on my brush of the black eyeshadow and popping this in the hollow of the under eye, and this wants to be quite intense. You don't need to dip your brush back into the eyeshadow to create this because otherwise you might get a lot of fall down. Instead, use what's left on the bristles. When you're working on top of a cream, it really does extend the life of the shadow that's in the brush. It tends to make it go further, so you don't really need to dip your brush back into the eyeshadow very often. Here I have a concealer brush which has a little bit of the base makeup in the bristles, and I'm using that to tap over to blend that out. Again, we're not going to use swiping motions, so you'll see me switching between brushes that I'm applying the eyeshadow with and then also using that same concealer brush that has a little bit of that base makeup in to tap everything out to create that gradient. Having eyeshadow down on top of the eyelid before you apply paint just gives it some longevity. It prevents the paint splitting and not having any colour left on the skin. So do apply your eyeshadow even if it is patchy, because it will help when you apply your paint over the top. Here I'm taking a small brush that has a little bit of eyeshadow on it just to create a shadow in between the brow furrow. I'm using a tapping motion just to apply this so that it looks like a shadow, and once that's in place we can go in with a fine liner brush and black to enhance all these lines to create more of a three-dimensional finish. You can either use paint or eyeshadow for this. I prefer to use eyeshadow because you can always smudge this out if you need to. You can tone it down, but with paint it tends to be there. Once it's on there it dries down. So eyeshadow is always a lot easier because it means you can manipulate it at a later stage if you want to. You can see I've added dark lines to the forehead, around the brows and also across the nose. I'm actually going to connect these a little bit later on because I feel like a scrunched nose here looked better. And I'm now just creating deeper circles around the eyes, and you can see I used the brush that had a little bit of the base makeup in and a little bit of darkness from patting over some of these areas. Like what I'm doing now, this darkness is in the brush, so I can use that to create shadows where I feel like it needs it. So I'm also taking it down the sides of the nose. Here I'm connecting the scrunchy area of the nose because again it just looks more sinister. It's creating a shape to the face or an emotion that is permanently there. So you don't always have to raise your brows and scrunch your face to create it. It's there because you've drawn it there. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I've used grey eyeshadow to enhance the socket around the eye, so it looks more like a heavy bag. And then I've taken that base colour and added a little bit more white to it to create a highlight on the bag of the eye, so it looks like it's a bit fuller and it protrudes a bit more. It's very theatrical, but it does work. And then I've created some additional crow's feet, but you don't want to blend them out too much because you still want them to be very theatrical and very visible in low lighting. I'm using a blending brush with a little bit of that grey eyeshadow, and I'm taking that from the nose down around the sides of the mouth, and then I'm also taking a little bit around the temple area to sink this area, and then also the hollows of the cheeks. And I'm using the angled brush that I use around the top of the forehead towards the beginning of this tutorial. If any of these areas look a little bit too intense for you, just go in with your concealer brush that has a little bit of that cream in it. This will help to blend everything for you. So you can see why I haven't set the face. Having that emollient base when you're working with a powder on top really does help create a beautiful gradient. Matte eyeshadows on a set base tends to look quite patchy, whereas when you're working on something that's slippy, you don't get the patchiness. So this works in your favour when you're creating this kind of makeup. So we've sunk the hollows of the cheeks all the way down to the chin, around the sides of the chin. We're now taking a highlight shade, which is that base makeup with a little bit of the extra white in there, and going between the two grey panels that we have drawn on either side of the chin. So now it looks like the skin is drawn and as if it's slightly puckered as it comes down the face, which gives that very gaunt looking finish. We're going to do the same with the filtrum, so apply some grey right through the centre and then pat over that with what you have left on your concealer brush. Don't worry about all the finesse right now, get all these main areas done, then we can go back in and tweak them towards the end. So I'm going in with my angled liner brush and applying some of that dark grey around the jawline. And then I'm now going to reshape Jack's chin with a little bit of black eyeshadow. I'm creating a bit of a cleft chin, so we're doing an upside down V and then using our concealer brush to pat that in to create more of a shadow rather than a drawn on line. Then I'm going to take a slightly smaller brush and go on top of the chin underneath the top lip to create almost like a rainbow. Once you have that shape, swap your brush to your concealer brush and start working over this to create a softer finish. Again, we want this to all look like soft shadows rather than harsh lines. So blend that in underneath the top lip and then start working on the rainbow shape to create more of a shadow. Next, you want to go in with the highlight shade to make this area look a little bit more puffy, which again enhances the shadow that we've already applied. And then when you blend that right down, it really does change the shape of Jack's chin. It looks a little harsher, again, adding to that overall sinister feel that we're creating. I'm using black cream on Jack's lips, but you can use a lipstick. You don't need to be too neat about this because we're going to use the cream to pull the colour up to create these kind of fine lines around the lips, which ages Jack's lips a little bit. Again, it just adds to the overall finish that we are looking for here. So we're creating lines down from the top of the nose and almost like we're going to connect them, but we don't quite reach there. I then switch from a fine liner brush to a small blending brush to soften these lines and then go with a highlight colour in between. Again, this is just adding three-dimensional finishes to all these lines, and then I just pat over that with my concealer brush. Going back to my black Superstar paint, I'm colouring in the eyelid so it looks super dark, much more intense. If you're doing this on someone else, make sure that they open their eyes and look down so the skin is stretched so you can get all the tiny little crevices at the lash line, otherwise it spoils it. Lastly, I'm just adding a little bit of spackling of that black paint just to break up the top of the Widow's Peak area. I just feel like adding a little bit of texture to this helped, but it's not necessary, you don't have to do it. I decided not to go too dark around the bottom half of the eyes. I wanted a little bit of the skin tone colour to peer through, the same way I liked a little bit of the redness on the centre of the lips peering through. It's another reason I didn't darken the actual waterline. I feel like having slight redness here makes it more sinister. I hope you guys enjoyed that tutorial. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Is this a look that you would like to try over Halloween? I do also have a vampire for kids and I will link that on screen for you now. A huge thank you to Jack for being my wonderful model, and everything I've used I will list and link in the description bar. Don't forget you can get all of your supplies for makeup from themakeuparmoury.com, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!